Dear Excellencies, dear Member of the Parliament, dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure to welcome you as the director of this institute to this Heinrich Neisser Lecture. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome Martin Selmayr for giving this lecture on Europe's economic and monetary union. And since we are in a time of crisis, we are very eager to see your insights. You have been in the EU Commission as an insider, as a Secretary General, and now you are here as an ambassador of the EU in Vienna. And we want to welcome you and see what you have to say. We will have a presentation about 30 minutes, then we will have about 20 minutes discussion, and then we will have the buffet in the end. But I don't want to spend too much time. I want to give over to Franz Fischler, our president of the Board of Trustees, and he's also an insider. And so I'm eager to see what he has to say.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. Welcome to the IHS. A special welcome to all the excellencies, ambassadors from various countries. A special welcome to our honorary president, Heinrich Neisser. The name of this lecture is his name. And last but not least, a special welcome to Martin Selmayr and his wife. Welcome to the IHS. So we look forward to hear from you what you have to say to our today's topic, which is Europe's economic and monetary union, how resilient, how future-proof is it today? Not an easy issue, but we all know Mr. Selmayr. He doesn't shy away from very difficult topics. Just a few words about the personality of Mr. Selmayr. He worked for a long time in Brussels. He was the head of cabinet of the former Luxembourgian commissioner, Viviane Reding, and then he became head of cabinet of the President Jean-Claude Juncker, and later on also he was the Secretary General of the European Commission, so the #1 civil servant in the Commission. And he was really very powerful and also very successful when he worked in the Commission. And we are really proud that he accepted our invitation to come here this evening and to speak to us. And I'm sure we will have also a lively discussion afterwards. And I think we should not wait anymore. Welcome. And I invite you to start. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here at the ihs. And I'm happy for 3 reasons. First of all, because Franz Fischler has invited me. When Franz Fischler invites you, I think he was in the Commission long before I was there, and he is still there when I'm no longer in Brussels, because he is the model for many civil servants there. So if he calls you and says you have to come, you have no choice, you have to come, and it's an honor. So thank you, Franz, for the invitation. It's an honor to be at the EIS. Come here on this side, because it's easier. You don't need this between us. It's an honor to be at the EIS, because in Brussels, it's a very, very prestigious institute. I'm saying in Brussels, it is a very prestigious institute. I hope everybody in Vienna knows it as well. We love to read the great research papers of the EIS. We like the interdisciplinary approach, and we wish you a lot of success for the challenges of the weeks and months to come. I'm particularly happy today to be here because it's the Heinrich Neisser Lecture. The Heinrich Neisser Lecture, well, for those who don't know about... ich muss das hier anmachen. Can you hear me now? Yes. I'm happy to be here also because it's the Heinrich Neisser Lecture, because Heinrich Neisser is a model for everybody who works on European affairs in Austria, and in particular for me, for somebody who is a lawyer, who is a bit uncertain today to speak an economic topic here at the ihs. It's a relief that somebody like Heinrich Neisser has prepared the ground already many years ago. Lawyers are allowed to speak here. I thank you for having paved the way and that I can speak with confidence this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, the euro is a subject that is, and you will feel it a bit later, a subject of, it's a personal subject for me. I think in my life there are two things, my wife and the euro, and almost in this order, and I've managed that they're not jealous against each other, at least my wife not to the euro, I don't know how it's the other way around. Because in 1997 something very interesting happened to me. I just finished my law exam at the University of Passau, and my academic father said a very interesting sentence, I don't know how this should work with the euro. A currency without a state, that will never work. And while most people would probably have listened to that, I was in this Sturm und Drang side of academics, and I said, well, I have to prove that it works. So I decided to write my PhD on the euro as a lawyer, which was, of course, a rather courageous idea. I found out very quickly that I know nothing as a lawyer about money. So I said I have to do an internship at the European Central Bank. I went to Frankfurt in 1998. And when you are there in Frankfurt, after some time, they gave me a contract, and I stayed for 3 years there, and then I went to the European Commission. So without this sentence, the euro will never work, I would never have joined the Commission, and therefore it is for me almost a dialectic challenge. Whenever I hear something about the euro, I have to take the floor on it, because it's like when somebody speaks about my wife, I speak about it, and when somebody speaks about the euro, I do this as well. As a German, the Germans have a particular tension in its relationship with the euro. When I started to work in the European Central Bank, my real father said to me, please don't go there, they only will promote inflation. In Germany, the euro was not popular. I'm not sure that it's very popular today, and that's why I'm collecting, I have a collection habit, I'm collecting newspaper cover pages of the German press, and since recently also of the Austrian press, that say negative things about the euro. That's an extract. I have much more, but that's an extraction. Basically, whenever something happens, you have it front page, that the end is near. The lie on the euro, but this was, I think, the one that triggered today's lecture, the return of the euro crisis. That was in summer this year. The return of the euro, and you see the chains are almost broken. We are close to the end, as the Anglo-Saxon world is telling us since 2 or 3 decades since the euro has started. So my starting point is to speak about that and to tell you if it's really true that the euro is once again close to the end. There was a time in 2012, 2015, when the Financial Times wrote every week 3 days to save the euro, 10 days to save the euro. And they wrote it every 2 weeks again, even though the euro was still there, and the euro is still there today. So let's find out if we are now in a crisis again, as the Handelsblatt and some others try to tell us. Of course, I could, as a European civil servant, say it's a good thing that we're in a crisis, because Jean Monnet, the father of European integration, once said, well, in English you would say, never waste a good crisis, so when there's a crisis you can repair things, make them better. But I find this too pessimistic an approach. I don't share the assumption that at the moment we have a euro crisis or that we would be close to a euro crisis, and I will explain to you why. I think our approach should be totally different. We Europeans always say we are in a crisis. Whenever something happens, we are in a crisis. The word crisis is the most popular word in the political debate in European Union member states, notably in the German language. We are more pessimistic. In America, they are never in a crisis. They're always winning. We are always in a crisis. We are in a poly-crisis, I even hear. So are we really in a crisis, ladies and gentlemen? So we in the European Commission have, since this year, a new task. We have to go and travel around the world and sell European Union bonds to the markets. And suddenly we have to become a bit more American. When you want to sell a bond, you cannot tell everybody that you are the worst continent of the world. That you cannot do. You have to tell people
that Europe is a rather successful continent, and you can only convince investors if you really believe that. So what we're doing now, and you will find this on the website of the Commission, we have now an investor presentation. And this investor presentation starts to tell people what the European Union is and how it works. This is the first page of the investor presentation. Huh? It tells you something what you probably know, but you have to think you are somewhere in Japan, you're in Singapore, and people say the European Union, and their first impression is what most people think is very complicated. How does this work? I will not even look into that. So you have to explain to them, it's 27 member states working together. They share a single currency. They have the largest single market in the world. They have most trading partners in the world, more than most other continents in the world. They have a single currency, they have a common budget. That's something, very simple thing. It's a bit like at school. But if you don't tell this to investors, they will not believe that a bond, which has the European flag, that they will buy it. We have also in our European Union investor presentation, we tell them we have 19 member states. On the 1st of January, we are even 20. So it seems to be an attractive project. More countries are joining. We started with 11, now we are 20. So it seemed to be that the euro is an attractive project. 340 million people are around it, and we have a lot of countries around the world who have pegged their currency to the euro. So if you add to this all the people in the world that benefit from the euro, to our 340 million citizens, you have another 175 million, so quite a significant share of the world population is using directly or indirectly the euro. That's what we tell investors, ladies and gentlemen. And now, of course, they come and say, well, there is now a huge crisis. I'm reading this every day in the newspapers. There's a big crisis. The big crisis, Putin's invasion. And now everything is off. Huh? You Europeans, you are now in the deepest crisis ever. You will not survive that. The euro will be under attack. And it's interesting to see, this is an index. I don't know if you have heard about it. The economists certainly have heard it. That's the VIX index. The VIX index became famous in the financial crisis. It is measuring volatility in financial markets. It's when people suddenly panic, and when they panic, they sell. Notably, they sell bonds. Huh? And you see here the index, when of course it's very high, it's a lot of volatility. When it's low, there's not a lot of volatility. And while we probably would think at the moment we're in a very big crisis, if you see, this year was the corona pandemic. We are here. Huh? So the corona pandemic was, in terms of volatility, 5 times bigger. This was the financial crisis. So just to put things into perspective where we are, yes, there is some volatility, as you see. And yes, if you present, like the British government at the moment, an unfunded budget to the public, well, then you are bordering a financial crisis, but we're not doing this in Europe. In the European Union, we're not doing this. So I think the British volatility chart was a bit higher in the last weeks. But in the European Union, while there is admittedly more volatility, we are far away from the levels of the pandemic and of the financial crisis. When I go out here in the cafes and bars in Vienna and speak to people, or listen to people, I have the impression we are in the worst economic crisis ever. So I'm hearing the word recession every day. I'm hearing every day that everything goes down the river, mass unemployment is prepared. Well, that's not the case. Huh? Yes, there is, of course, a dent in growth, logically. There is no war in history that didn't have this effect. That's why we don't have wars inside the European Union, why we agreed on a peace project not to have wars. But unfortunately, Vladimir Putin doesn't follow the EU treaties, he doesn't even follow the United Nations Charter, and therefore he hasn't followed this logic. So war is brought upon us in our neighborhood, and that has, of course, an impact on growth. But growth this year in the euro area will be 3.1%, according to the current prediction. That is rather good growth compared to the previous years. And also for next year, at least if one never knows with projections, but at the moment we don't predict for most parts of the Eurozone a recession, and where there is a recession, it will be certainly not one as we had it in the pandemic or as we had it during the financial crisis. So I say that not to say that we should be complacent, there is a big challenge out there, but we are not at the moment in the worst economic crisis of our times. I think sometimes one has to know that because we have to sell bonds to investors in Singapore and everybody, so we have also to be clear how we use our vocabulary. Ladies and gentlemen, and the crisis, of course, caused by this, it's basically an energy crisis. You see here in blue, these are the imports of Russian gas into the European Union, which have been drastically reduced. On the one side, because Putin has reduced the gas supplies. On the other side, because we have replaced them as soon as we can. We have replaced, the European Union was dependent on Russian gas supplies at the beginning of the year of 40%. Today, it is only 7.5%, so we have reduced, not voluntarily, but we have substituted most of the gas from Russia with gas from other parts of the world, mainly from Norway, which is our biggest supplier of gas to Europe at the moment, and from the United States of America. You see, of course, also with the reduction of the Russian supplies, the increase in the price. So, of course, we have substituted the Russian gas, but it was very expensive. But also there, the peak was somewhere in summer. We are below the peak. Here you see gas prices of 350 euro per megawatt hour. We are now below 200, so the European Union has done something together. We have agreed to fill our storage levels. We have agreed to save gas. We have promoted renewable energies, and we have bought supplies from other parts of the world. So we are not at the moment anymore in the worst part of this crisis, even though our energy prices are still disproportionately high. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is something what nobody speaks about, that we are at the moment, and I don't think most people are aware, in the best labor market that the Euro area and the European Union ever had. It's not mass unemployment. It's the opposite that we have at the moment. We have in the Euro area, we have at the moment unemployment rate of 6.6%. That is the lowest ever recorded for the Euro area, and in the European Union of 6%. That is a remarkable good labor market in the European Union. We have the contrary of mass unemployment. We have shortage of labor. That has also negative effects. If you go into any kind of restaurant in Vienna or in Austria, they will tell you that, and also in Tyrol or everywhere else, they will tell you what this means for them. But it is not a situation where at the moment the people are queuing in front of the labor offices to get a job. It's the contrary. The employers are looking for employees. So I think we need to know that to show, as we talk today, about the resilience of the Euro area. And the resilience is, of course, also reflected by the fact that our labor market is at the moment extremely strong. That is, of course, the big challenge. And that's what many people, notably in the German-speaking part, but increasingly also in other parts of the European Union, what they are worried about, the return of inflation. You see here the history of inflation in the Euro area since the introduction of the Euro. We had, for a very long time, too low inflation in the Euro area. This was our biggest problem. We had here, if you look, the 10 years before the pandemic, the average inflation rate was 1.3%. That is, economically speaking, far too low, and the European Central Bank and others tried to do everything to get it up. It was almost impossible in the context that we had. But 1.3% is not very good for growth. It's not very good for the dynamics in an economy. So we tried to get it up, and suddenly, since the end of last year, the beginning of this year, suddenly the monthly inflation rates go through the roof. We have at the moment, this October, we're about 10%. This year, the average will be above 8% of inflation. These are inflation rates we are not used since the 70s and 80s. So this is, of course, at the beginning a shock. It's an inflation shock, and we have to understand what is behind that and what can we do about it. Because inflation, even though most people are not used to that anymore, has huge social costs and has over time also economic and wealth costs. So what kind of inflation is this? This is here the 19 member states of the Euro area and the composition of what is driving their inflation rates. And what you see here, that's very clear, the red part of the column is the energy price. We have an inflation that in all countries, except Malta, for specific reasons that I will not explain here today, is going up because of the energy prices. This is almost 50% of the increase in inflation in most member states. And you see particularly strong, it is towards the east, in the Baltic states, where the inflation rates are at the moment above 20%. But that also means something. If inflation rates are driven by energy and a little bit also by food, it is something that is not something what central banks can do a lot about. It's a supply shock. A central bank can be active when the economy is overheating. Then a central bank intervenes and increases interest rates. But the European Central Bank can do nothing, not a single thing, to make gas prices lower. That's not possible for the European Central Bank, for any central bank in the world. So that we have to be aware. The European Central Bank can, in such a situation, only make sure that inflation expectations over time don't disanchor, as economic policy experts say that. So suddenly people think this is normal. Two-digit inflation will be there, and suddenly wages go up. Suddenly the level of prices in the economy goes up, and people get used to two-digit inflation rates. That's why the European Central Bank has increased for the first time in 11 years, in July, and now a second time in September, its interest rates by historical margins, by 0.5% in July, and now even by 0.75%, a hike of a magnitude we never had in the euro area. The American Central Bank is doing the same. They have already hiked 3 times, 0.75 percentage points. So we are clearly in a new world after a decade of very low, too low inflation. We suddenly have high inflation after a decade of interest rates at 0 or even at negative rates. We have suddenly interest rates going up. And that leads to a lot of nervousness. That explains also the volatility that we saw, because we have a regime change. When suddenly interest rates go up, when people were for 10 years used to 0 or negative interest rate, that changes economic behavior. That changes the nervousness. That changes what people buy on the markets, what they sell. The whole environment is a different one. And that, I think, creates the volatility that we see at the moment, even though it is far away from what we had during the financial crisis. So, do we go back into a financial crisis, ladies and gentlemen? When the interest rates go up, that means the price of money, that means the price of investment, also the cost of borrowing for public and private investors goes up. So are we going back into a financial crisis? So again, if you compare the situation where we were in 2007, 2008, when the financial crisis started, one good news, we seem not to be facing at the moment a banking crisis, because we have done our homework in Europe. We have forced, and banks were not very happy about this, we have forced them to strengthen their balance sheets. Banks across the euro area, because of common rules, a banking rule book and a banking union, we have now the capital has been increased, the buffers have been increased. You see where we were in 2009 and where we today. We have around 15% capital to equity ratio in the euro area. That is extremely solid. We had 5% before the financial crisis. And here you see the so-called non-performing loans. The non-performing loans are loans on the balance sheets of banks, of private banks, which are not going to be paid back because the person who took the loan is now bankrupt or will not pay it back, because they can't back the mortgage or whatever. So we had here a height in 2013. That's been consistently reduced. It is now on average in the European Union and in the euro area below 2%. And even countries like Greece, which were in a particular financial stress situation in 2015 with capital controls and a lot of people who couldn't pay back their mortgages and their loans, we are now below 10%, so which is for Greece, after a lot of common work, a very good result. So it seems that we are not going into another banking crisis, what is positive, because remember what happened in the financial crisis. Banks went bust. The state had to pay and rescue them. That meant the state had too much debt. Ireland, I see my colleague from Ireland, I think it was 32% of the deficit in a year just to rescue the banks. And so something what we were never used to, because all the banks went, of course, to Ireland, because one should go to Ireland because it's a wonderful country, in particular at the time for banks. And suddenly, out of a banking crisis became a financial and a debt crisis where governments and taxpayers had to bail out banks. We seem not to be in such a situation because the banks' balance sheets are much better than at the time. But there's another worry. A financial crisis, remember at the time what happened? Suddenly, people got very nervous if all countries, governments, could pay back their debt. That was, I think, the fatal loop in which we suddenly were since 2008, particularly in 2010, 2012, and again in 2015 concerning Greece. So are we again in such a situation? At the time, this was triggered by an impression that the euro area would not stay together. We call it fragmentation risk or even redenomination risk. So the risk that one country would suddenly be under such a lot of pressure that it would have to leave the euro. That suddenly the price of their government bonds would not be determined by the economic fundamentals, by fears that this country would over time be part of another part of the world and no longer of the euro area. Are we in such a situation? Do we have a return of fragmentation? So at first impression, if you look at what is called sovereign bond spreads, that is basically the yields that a country has to pay for their sovereign debt above those of the more stable countries, mainly above German government bonds. So you see, indeed, we had here twice a situation in the previous 4 years, where suddenly here, because of the pandemic in 2020, suddenly people became nervous and said, will all countries survive this pandemic financially? And suddenly, at the beginning of the pandemic, Greek and Italian government debt went up. People were very nervous because people thought these countries are affected, they have high debt, so will they be able to pay this back? And it took, at the beginning, the European Central Bank was a bit unclear in its communication. Then they launched a new program, the so-called PEP, the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. And just by launching that, you saw what happened when they said, we will intervene and buy the debt if it's necessary. Then suddenly the yields went back down. And now, where we are now, here in the beginning of 2022, where suddenly things are going up again. You see here, blue is Italy and yellow is Greece. So suddenly we have again a nervousness in the markets. And you see here the nervousness concerning Italian government, 2-year Italian government bonds. It is not as high as in the pandemic, and certainly not as high as during the financial crisis and other crises, but it is remarkable, you can see it. And in Italian newspapers, my Italian friends will be able to confirm that the word spread is not translated. It is the spread. The spread is on the front page of La Repubblica or whatever. So it is really something what is politically and economically relevant. But are we really in a situation that brings us back to where we were in 2012, in the financial crisis? Do we really have to fear that the country will have to leave the euro under the pressure of the markets? Well, let's put things into perspective. These are the spreads in the euro area since 1995. Since 1995, you see where we started. Different countries with their individual currencies had different spreads, of course. They were assessed differently. They were not part of a monetary union. Then came the euro, and something very remarkable happened. Suddenly, there was no difference anymore in the markets between an Italian government bond, a Greek government bond, a German, a Dutch, a French, and later an Austrian. The markets saw we are all the same. I find this is beautiful. The markets believed that we were more European than we actually were. The markets believe we are a federal state. That's what the markets believed. They didn't realize, first of all, these are young investors, they don't read the EU treaties. I forgive them for that, it's complicated. They thought, okay, they have the same currency, so if something happens, they will help each other. By the way, that is not so stupid to say that. So perhaps these young investors were not totally wrong, but it is true that during this time, the markets underpriced the risk differences between the member states, because of course some member states had riskier government bonds than others. Not risky in a dramatic way, but some had higher debt, others lower debt, others had higher growth, others had lower growth. So it was a bit strange what happened there. It showed that the markets were not functioning. This is a failure of markets for 10 years, that markets were not seeing there was a difference. And suddenly, you remember Lehman Brothers in 2008, and suddenly the markets went into the other direction. Suddenly they all had said there is no risk in the markets, we buy everything, and suddenly one of the biggest investment banks in the world goes bankrupt. So suddenly what they did, they all looked, they reappraised their risk, and they sold whatever was not totally stable, and now the markets accelerated in the other direction. You see, I have to say, it was very strange at the time what happened. Yes, the Greek government had a higher deficit and much higher debt, but it was not higher or more problematic than the one of Vietnam or of Cambodia. But on the markets, they paid 50 times more than Cambodia. So the markets now overreacted in the other direction. First, they had underpriced the risk. Now they overpriced it, because suddenly people started to say, yeah, perhaps Greece will have to leave the euro, and then perhaps others will have to follow. The market said, well, then I better get out of this, because if it's not the same currency in which I invested, then I put everything, well, where I put it? I put it into the Netherlands, or into Germany, or into France, but I take it out everywhere where there is a bit of a higher risk. And we had to do a lot to control this, what became a sovereign debt crisis. You see, here was the first stabilization measures. Here in 2015, we had again, that was when Alexis Tsipras governed Greece, when suddenly there was a prime minister who said, now I leave the euro. You remember Mr. Varoufakis, who even went to the euro group and said that. Also that, after a lot of hard work, we got under control. So since that moment in time, we are in normal times. So what I would say here, this is more normal. Here we have differences of risks between member states. but not excessive, but also not totally underpriced. And then suddenly comes the pandemic. And I think here you see something. If you look at the pandemic, which was a huge external shock, everything in lockdown, everything shut, the economy not existing anymore, and what you see with the spreads, there's a little bump here. Well, because now the European Union acted in a few days, both the European Central Bank and the member states acted, and therefore we didn't have a financial crisis at the time. I think this is, for me, the most interesting comparison to see what happened in 2012 and what happened in 2020. The market started to test again, but very quickly we convinced them with our common answer. The common answer was, on the one side, the European Central Bank, and the other side, all EU member states together launching a common fund, the so-called Next Generation EU fund with 800 billion euro, to say that's our investment to protect all member states in the euro area and to make sure that nobody was left behind. And now we're here. Now we're here. This is now Putin's invasion. Also, again, we're just going up. Now is the question what will happen next. Will we be able this time to contain it or not? In the pandemic we did it. Are we able to do it now? I think that's the question we are going to look at now. Ladies and gentlemen, some people say we are going into a crisis because some member states in the euro area have higher debt and others not. That's true. We have a group of member states, Belgium, Greece, Spain, France, Italy, Cyprus and Portugal, who have public debt in relation to GDP higher than 90%. But as such, is debt higher than 90% a reason for a financial crisis? Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like us to all have no debt, but unfortunately in our modern world, all countries around the world have debt. A country like the United States of America has debt above 140% of GDP. Japan of 200% above GDP. So it seems not to be only a figure, an abstract figure, 60, 70, 90, 100% that is decisive whether a country can finance itself, but how the structure of the public debt is really looking like. Therefore, under the control of the Italian ambassador, let's look at the Italian debt, because I think it's not very well known. And as this was published, Commission figures that were published in Die Presse, I dare to present it here, because then it must be true. It's Commission and Die Presse, that's a lot together. So here you see something. Yes, you see abstractly Italian debt is rather high. Today 150.8%. But if you look at the history of Italian debt, what happened there over the last decade is rather interesting. In Italy, Italy had for almost a decade what is called a primary surplus. A primary surplus means that if you deduct interest payments, they earn more money in their public budget than they spend. I don't think that most people are aware of that. So Italy had done its homework, perhaps could have done more, but Italy was a country that for almost 10 years managed to generate more revenue than to spend. I don't think this is the public perception on Italy. And by that, Italy, during this decade, reduced debt. Not a lot, but it reduced debt. Only with the corona pandemic, like in all countries, public money had to be used. You know, we all did that. Austria did it, Germany did it, everybody did it. So the debt went up. But here in 2021, it went down again because Italy tried to bring back by a primary surplus its deficit. So ladies and gentlemen, so one has to look into the details. And we have to go a bit further into that. We have also to look what member states have done over the last 10 years with their public debt. Here you see something. This is what member states paid as yields on their sovereignty bonds in the time 2008 to 2012, when markets were stressed. Greece here above 12%, that was the highest. Italy here above 5%, Portugal above 7%. Here this is the lowest what they paid in the last decade. So you see some of them paid 0 or even negative yields on their government bonds. And here see the orange line is where we are today. So we are far away from the highest level. We have, every country pays now for their debt, they have to pay interest, but we are paying relatively moderately. We are not yet in a situation of crisis as we were in 2008 to 2012. And why is that? Because the last 10 years, member states used the last 10 years, all of them, All finance ministers have not the interest to spend more money than they have. They want to reduce debt and to have a good budget. All member states do that. They have changed the structure of their debt. They have used the time of low interest rates to prolong the maturities of their government bonds. Normally, countries, Italy, Germany, also Austria, had the length of their government bonds, when they became mature, was 2, 3, 4 years. Well, now you could do something. You could shift all your short-term debt into longer-running bonds and meant keeping the interest payments for your country, for your taxpayer, low for longer. And that's what they all did. Particular noteworthy, Austria and Belgium here, they are the best of the class. They have prolonged the maturities of their government debts above 10 years. Why is this relevant? Well, Mr. Brunner doesn't have to worry if the interest rates go up at the moment. Because his government debt, he has to repay it on average in 10 years and then has to take new debt for it when he rolls it over for the next government bond. So that means it prolongs the effect of the interest rates of the European central banks into the future. And all countries have done this. You see here Germany and Italy, here they are twins on this one. They are above 6 years in the length of the maturity. France and the Netherlands above 8 years. So that means for the finance minister, I have now debt, my debt is running for the next 7, 8, 10 years, and only then I have to roll it over, and only then I have to pay the higher interest that the European Central Bank, with its interest rate increase, is currently introducing into the markets to fight inflation. So that's important, because it doesn't matter how high your debt stock is alone. It matters when you have to repay it. That's why Greece is not even here. Because of the rescue packages that we did for Greece, Greece has to pay back its government debt for the next time in 20, 30 years. That, I think, was something that is not widely noticed. It was probably what saved Greece, that we basically made sure that we changed the maturities of government debt in Greece. Ladies and gentlemen, so we have to look at that, and if you look at that, we are in a much better situation today than we were in 2012, where most countries had to pay back their debt after 2 years, and some even after 1 year. So it's a very, very big difference. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me come to the most important thing from my perspective. Why is all that? It's not only clever finance ministers at work. We have also done something in the last decade, as the lesson of the financial crisis, of everything what went wrong before that, to strengthen the institutional architecture of our economic and monetary union. And I think if you look today, we have 7 pillars which make out the resilience of the euro. Some of them already perfectioned, others work in progress. That's our euro, and let's look at the different pillars. The first 2 pillars, which were there from the beginning, are the fact that behind the euro are 27 member states. 27 member states, which are, some of them more, some are less, but together the richest continent in the world. This is a big benefit for the euro. And I'm not saying this only to investors. I think we have to tell this to everybody. Of these 27 member states today, or as of the 1st of January, 20 are in the euro. That's also important. There was a time when, of the member states of the European Union, less than half were in the euro. That was after 2004, after the enlargement. And that was difficult to explain this to the outside world. This was also sometimes difficult to work in the European Union, some in the euro, others not. So how do you make this work? How do you make this understand? Today, that's the only good thing about Brexit, which otherwise is a disaster, notably forbidden, that today more than 87% of EU GDP are in the euro area. So that, I think, matters to the outside world to explain the European Union. That's a strong pillar. Our single market is the biggest single market in the world. It is making sure that we can trade in between EU member states, and that is, of course, good to share risk, also economically. Our single market is our best economic asset, even though we still have to work a bit on having a common industrial policy, a common economic policy, but that's a question of politics. It's not a matter of institutional structures. Then, in the financial crisis, we added to this one 2 other important pillars. And I dare to call them what I think they are from an institutional point of view. We have now a federal central bank. The European Central Bank is a federal central bank in the sense like the US Fed. It can do exactly what the US Fed is also doing. We were not sure if it could do that until 2012. The US Fed, if there are American government bonds on the secondary market, the US buys them, as, by the way, the central bank of every country in the world. The German Bundesbank bought government debt of Germany in the 70s, in the oil crisis, in millions, to the tune of millions, As all governments, central banks do that on the secondary markets to stabilize the financial conditions in an economy. The ECB does it only really since 2012. You remember the famous speech of Mario Draghi in London, because he spoke to investors, because the investors are in London, and he spoke to them and said, I will do whatever it takes. He didn't have to spend a single euro on this promise, because just the central bank saying, I'm there, knows all speculators now know, go away, because you can never compete with the central bank. And since then, we have adopted in the ECB a number of other programs. I will not go through all the abbreviations because I don't like abbreviations, but they are here. So all together, we have now the European Central Bank being able to do everything it can do to counter risk in the markets. It's now a true federal central bank like the US Fed. The latest innovation is the transmission protection instrument that allows us to intervene in the government bond markets in an unlimited manner, created in July this year. I know some lawyers and others, I'm also a lawyer, will say this doesn't work. I promise you this works. It's allowed, it's allowed under the treaties. We can discuss this later. We have added then to that in 2014 another element, because the last crisis was also a banking crisis. We have now centralized supervision of the 110 most important banks at European Union level. We have a federal banking supervisor. We have a federal backstop for our member states' banking systems. What we don't have yet is a backstop for a saving system, but we are working on that one. That's the only missing piece. I have not mentioned, I have not mentioned here in 2012 that we have created also the ESM. Member states together have created a European Monetary Fund that can mobilize at any moment in time, if member states agree, up to 500 billion euro to support a member state like the IMF can do this in any financial crisis. And interesting enough, of these 500 billion euro, there's still 413.8 billion euro available at this moment in time. So if somebody says we don't have enough money to counter any crisis, well, I would say the ECB here together, that is more than 5 trillion, here another 413.8 billion. Tell this to an investor if he then speculates really against the euro. These safety nets didn't exist in 2012, they exist today. And the latest two additions are what I call, and some of you will say that goes too far, a federal fiscal capacity. No, we have for the first time since 2020 at European Union level a common pot of money to stabilize and strengthen growth in our member states. The so-called Corona Fund Next Generation EU with 800 billion euro, and together with the SURE system, which is financing the unemployment insurances to make sure that short-term unemployment can be compensated by member states. That was necessary in the pandemic. Altogether, that's 6% at EU level to strengthen our member states. In the US, we have at federal level around 30% of GDP available in a fiscal budget. So we are still away from that, but we don't have nothing at EU level. We have now at least the embryo of a federal fiscal capacity, even though it is meant to be temporary, but it's there. It can be used. And interesting enough, in the 800 billion euro in Next Generation EU, there are still 700 billion euro available as we speak at this moment in time. Member states have not used 700 billion of 800 billion. So it's not a question at the moment of safety nets of money. The European Union has put everything there, and I think we need to tell this to the public, to investors, because at the moment it is a very risky business to bet against the euro, because we have all these safety nets, ladies and gentlemen. Even though there is still work in progress. I don't hide that. Ladies and gentlemen, and then is the most important thing. What is underpinning all this is something what has been underestimated in the last decade. It's political will. The euro is not just a currency made by economists for economists. It's also a political project. The 27 member states, and note the 20 that share the euro, stand behind this currency. People were pessimistic. Observers, notably the Anglo-Saxons, said that will never work. The Germans will skip out. The Dutch will not do it anymore. Perhaps the Austrians even. No, on the contrary. At the end, when push comes to shove, sometimes it took a bit longer, but at the end of the day, we work together, and that shows the political will that is there. The political will, by the way, was put into the system from the beginning. And as a lawyer, allow me to show you one article of the treaty, Article 122, which was never made it on the front pages of the German newspapers at the time, even though it's very important. You should read it again. First of all, the first paragraph is very interesting. It refers to the fact that we have a problem in the economy, that then the Council, the member states together, this is by the way with qualified majority, can decide upon the measures appropriate to the economic situation. That's quite a big competence. In a spirit of solidarity, in particular, if severe difficulties arise in the supply of certain products, notably in the area of energy. This is the Treaty of Lisbon. This is not today. This is the Lisbon Treaty. This is a very good legal basis that we're using at the moment almost every day. When we have compulsory saving of energy in Europe, this is what we use. If you have at the moment a new pot of money to support our common efforts, that will be used. Here it even says in paragraph 2, under this article we can organize union financial assistance. Financial assistance backed by the union if a member state has difficulty. That's what is the basis of the funding of Next Generation EU, of our Corona Fund. We have used this in the pandemic, and we can use it again if that should be necessary. What you see in this, that solidarity and measures to protect us, it's a decision of the Council. The Council can do that. The member state can decide and have a majority on that. If they don't have a majority, they cannot decide. But if they agree, if they sit together, if they ruffle each other's feather a little bit, they have the capacity to act also in a crisis situation, because this is a crisis clause. And there's another important article in the treaty that Mario Draghi referred to in his speech in London, even though he didn't quote the article. But he said at the time, the euro is irreversible. That is something, what is irreversible in life, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Protestant, but a Catholic would say marriage is probably irreversible. I think probably some parts of the Iranian constitution are legally irreversible, and the euro is irreversible. So Catholic marriage, the Iranian constitution, and the euro, ladies and gentlemen. That's quite a company in which the euro is. And ladies and gentlemen, if lawyers write this into the treaty, I remember in 2015 we discussed when some people said Greece should leave the euro. Some even wanted that. And then we thought, what does it mean if such a clause is in the treaty? Of course, nothing is forever. But what are the consequences if somebody has a contract in euro and wants repayment? And all 27 member states have agreed on a treaty that this is irrevocable. The damages to pay would be insurmountable. So investors would get their money back on this basis, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, this is not only law, it's politics and action. And therefore, I think it's very important that we understand this, that the euro is not only an economic project, but a political one. And somebody has said this, I think, in the best possible way. Allow me to show them that. That's again Mario Draghi. Mario Draghi made an interesting comparison that some people were very curious about why he used that. He compared the euro to a bumblebee. For the non-native speaker, that's a hummel. Huh? You see the hummel here? I think it's that's a bit the bumblebee that Mario Draghi envisaged. And he said at the time, when everybody doubted the euro, he said, the euro is a bit like a bumblebee, because it's a mystery of nature, because it shouldn't fly. Huh? According to the rules of nature, it's far too heavy. Huh? Why this cannot fly? Huh? It's heavier than it should. But nevertheless, the euro flew very well for a couple of years. And people asked, how does this come? There seems to be something in the air that makes the bumblebee fly. Something must have changed, that everybody stands behind this currency and then makes it fly. He says, well, we should not be satisfied about this. One day the bumblebee has to go to a certain diet and become a real bee, then it's a bit easier to fly. That is what it's doing. He said it's reforming itself, it's strengthening it. But until this has happened to perfection, because nobody is ever perfect, the bumblebee flies because it's carried by the joint political will of all 27 member states, and notably the 20 countries that will, as of the 1st of January, have the euro. Ladies and gentlemen, on this positive note, because this is of course provocative and meant to stimulate a discussion, I want to end my interpretation of the current situation. Is the euro resilient? Is it future-proof? I would say it is so resilient that we don't have to fear today a financial crisis. But that is not a reason to rest on our laurels and be complacent. Financial crisis can happen very quickly. So we have to continue to work on solidarity. We have this week a European Council on energy. Well, that's one of our vulnerabilities at the moment. Huh? Let's work on that one. Let's have the right answers to that. And the Commission has proposed some of them today. Let's also not forget that the euro will from time to time need our support. And it needs our support, notably in those who carry the euro. That's not only central banks, that's not only economists. These are countries that have democratically elected government and that need support in their population. So if you work for democracy, for a good debate, with arguments in favor and against, and at the end come to a good compromise, don't say this is a bad thing. Some people think, notably Vladimir Putin, thinks a compromise is a sign of weakness. No, a compromise is the dignity of democracy. It's when we come together somewhere in the middle, because that's the only way how we can do it in our complex society. You cannot go over the head of somebody else and decide something in a dictatorial way. That goes faster, but it doesn't lead to better results, as you can at the moment observe in Russia and also in China. Therefore, let's work on our democracies, then the bumblebee will fly even better. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Martin Selmayr, for this talk, which wasn't only really engaging, but also incredibly informative, and I must say that sort of really touched my heart. Very, very optimistic. A true European at heart. I love hearing you talk about the EU. You're running away. We still need you. I hope you are aware of that. Because what we would like to do now, of course, and I'm sure this talk has inspired a number of questions in the audience, so we would like to give you the opportunity to ask questions or to maybe just state a comment. Please feel welcome. If you would just raise your hand. Stephanie will be so kind to give you a microphone, and if you could maybe just quickly maybe stand up so we can all see you, and maybe just introduce yourself very quickly. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Karl Pichelmann. I worked for more than 20 years for the European Commission, and now I'm back in Vienna. I mean, I very much liked your talk, though I have to admit that the old joke about the optimist and the pessimist, I mean, came to my mind occasionally, which says that the optimist thinks that we live in the best possible world, and you said some things like the best labor market ever. The pessimist, on the other hand, fears that the optimist may be right. I mean, you have certainly been right. I mean, in explaining the really significant progress we have made in developing, say, new institutions, mechanisms to deal with the crisis, which puts us in a much better position now than we were, say, 10 years ago. On the other hand, I think we should not whitewash all away, I mean, about the many shortcomings that I think are still left. I mean, let me just mention a couple of them. I mean, that is banking union. I mean, banking union, I mean, let's admit it, I mean, it's largely an unfinished business. And we are moving at best sideways, if not backwards, I mean, with what regards, say, the fragmentation of national financial markets. Fiscal union, I mean, still we have a temporary instrument where, I mean, there appears to be not much appetite from important political players, I mean, to move on with this unfinished business. We have very little progress in terms of capital market union. Again, I mean, what now the current situation shows us, that even within the single market and, say, aspects and issues like a common energy market, for example, I mean, are still, I mean, there is still a lot of work to do, and I wonder, I mean, what kind of difficulties you see ahead of this.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
I will have to ask you, because we're already sort of a bit ahead of time, and this is what stands between you and the buffet. Remember that. So if I could please ask you to keep your comments and questions just on a tiny bit more on the short side. Would you like to answer?
Perhaps we collect two or three? Yes, let's collect two or three. If there's another one.
Yes, please.
So I'm the Italian ambassador. I like to be part of the discussion. Thank you very much. It was a very inspiring conversation. Now, we are in a democracy, so maybe to discuss is also very interesting. I'll ask the question that an Italian would never dare to ask. Do we still have a stability pact? And the reason why I'm asking is, when we, and allow me to make a comment. If you take out of the context, we started the euro at the time where the Soviet Union collapsed peacefully, Germany got united, and we expanded to the east, the European Union. Somehow it looks like that after 30 years we paid the bill for that. So the expansion to the east reacted, and I stop here. And when we created the euro, we had this conversion criteria. I don't know if this applies also to your marriage, the same conversion cohesion criteria. 3% of GDP deficit, and you have to go to 60% of debt to GDP ratio, all those things. And we are out now to the numbers. At the beginning, in the 90s, to be strictly respecting those criteria was very important to show the determination to support the euro. Now the euro is a reality. It's been flying for 30 years, 20 years now. And 30 years in theory as a common currency, then really as a currency 20 years. Don't we need more flexibility? Shouldn't we say, okay, 3% of GDP is a value which was simple to fix because it's simple, 3%, but shouldn't we also get a quality ratio? Say, if you invest 3% to stimulate growth, then it's okay, maybe you can go 4%, 5%. And do we need to have a 3% limit now that we are facing the need to support Ukraine versus Russia? So do we go to support Ukraine with the Stability Pact?
More questions?
Well, then I take these.
Oh, there we have one.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. My name is Martin Selmayr from the University of Vienna, Department of Political Science. I have a question regarding, to be very brief, the small state coalition of frugals. There was the new Hanseatic League, which you certainly know, and now more recently we have seen the Frugal Four, which are more famous in Austria because Austria was part of the Frugal Four. Traditionally, we saw Germany as kind of the defender of the frugals in the north of the Eurozone. Now, I personally don't think that the German position has moved so much, but what we see now is that there are other smaller countries that seem to be even more frugal than Germany and somehow drag their feet when it comes to more solidarity, to more stability mechanisms at the European level. They rather would like to see the countries in the south do their homework, as you called it, and as they called it. So my question is, how do you see these small state coalitions? Do you think they will be a major issue also in the future, or are these rather one-off phenomena that won't happen again so soon? Thanks.
Thank you very much, and now I'm going to horribly abuse my position
yes,
here
please.
and add one question. Because you outlined how the interventions by the ECB, but also the interventions during the pandemic helped sort of avert another crisis, and helped even during the crisis. You mentioned Draghi's very, very famous all that it takes. So the question is, now we have currently two instruments. The ECB has a number of instruments. The last one that they decided on is the TPI instrument, and we have the European Recovery and Resilience Facility as a big part of the Next Generation EU. Given the impact that the ECB has had over time, and given the impact that the European Recovery and Resilience Facility has had, isn't it time to put those on a stable framework? Rather than avoiding the question of sort of the debt union, joint debt, and always sort of going from one limited instrument to the next. Is it time to face it and say, we need this? Thank you.
Thank you for all these very interesting questions about which one could talk several hours, but what we are not going to do. On my former commission colleague, I would say it's a question of the glass 2/3 full or 1/3 empty. Of course, I think those people who think that Europe will ever be perfect, they should look if their own country, Germany or Austria, is totally perfect. If the United States of America is totally perfect. No, it's all democracies. We have to work every day to merge them, to adapt them to new challenges. And I think that's what we're doing here. That's what the Bumblebee is doing. And it will not be finished with the next two instruments or the next reform of this pact. No, we will have to continue. The world is changing. We have to be up to this. But we should also not belittle ourselves. you were giving a bit the speech that all Europeans give, and saying what is missing. It's interesting. In Altbach recently, Franz Fischler was probably there, there were people on the panel and one saying, what is the state of the world? And the Europeans said, oh, Europe is a disaster, and the Americans said, we are the best on the planet. Even though objectively that's not true, and neither economically nor politically. So I think we should sometimes think about how we speak about it. I like our self-critical approach, that's very European, but sometimes let's also make sure that we don't destroy ourselves. There's also something like a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think that what happened in 2012 when people were from the last Bavarian state secretary saying that Greece should leave the euro. Be careful what you say and what you wish for, and also be responsible of that. On the Stability and Growth Pact, I have to tell you this anecdote. When I was a young lawyer, I was really a lawyer. Today I'm no longer as a lawyer, as you probably have noticed, but I was a young and ambitious lawyer and a German lawyer. So I believed in the law and believed that it's very rigid. And I was brought into a room in Strasbourg. There were people, mainly men, sitting in a room, everybody smoking, and somebody was saying, this young guy here, this is the last person who still believes in the Stability and Growth Pact. That was me. So, and the person who was laughing about me was Jean-Claude Juncker. That was the first time I met him. And I think what I learned in the time working for these politicians who knew a lot and had seen a lot, much more than I had. Yes, the law is very important as an instrument to bring things in a direction. But legal dogma is also wrong. And neither the pact nor the treaty is written in this way as it is interpreted. Some people say, I remember it was the Bavarian Prime Minister, always Bavarians say these things. The Bavarian Prime Minister said Italy cannot join the euro if it's not below 3% of deficit. Is that true? No. That's legally incorrect. I've written a legal article on that. That is wrong. It's no, because it doesn't say so in the treaty. It doesn't say so. Let's not say something what we haven't agreed. It is a reasonable treaty. The treaty rules are made by 27 member states and they are not stupid. There is much more flexibility. Also on the pact, I would say the rule that at the moment doesn't make a lot of sense is that everybody who is above 60% of debt to GDP has to reduce every year until it reaches this by 1/20th their public debt. This is the debt in the European Union. That doesn't work. If we do that, then it's not a strict rule. It's one possibility there. I don't even have to change it because the Commission has never applied this rule because it is not so strict, but that at the moment wouldn't work. The 3% rule on the other side, I would say makes sense. And it makes sense at the moment. I would say the debt as such, I would use the quality criteria that you use. I would say people who invest at the moment in line with the philosophy of Next Generation EU. That's my personal opinion because the Commission has decided on that, not yet, who invests into the transition, into the green transition, into the transition to energy-friendly, climate-friendly resources, independence of fossil fuels. Yes, that's a good investment. I would also say somebody who invests in defense. That is a good investment, and that I would not count under the debt rule. Oh, now we are really at the end. Is Putin has already switched off, no, but you switched it on. You are our weapon against Putin. Thank you for that. And you see, it's much easier. We are not intimidated so easily by Putin. So, therefore, I think, do we need a big reform of the pact? I hope that we don't waste the time of the next 5 years to go back in orthodox things. But let's apply the rules with common sense. Hausverstand is a very important principle that I learned in Austria. And I learned from Jean-Claude Juncker, who, by the way, had a lot of Hausverstand when he applied the pact. You can apply the pact with common sense and in a non-rigid way, that it keeps something what I think we need. We need that all countries in the European Union don't do the same, but at least walk into the same direction. That is what convergent is. Croatia is joining this year, on the 1st of January, the euro, and it went through the convergence assessment. What is the deficit of Croatia in the year before joining? 2.3%. Logically, they can't be above 3%. So not for legal reasons, but also for psychological. You want to be part of a stable currency, you want to show that you qualify. Their debt is 75%. 75%, that's better than Austria, but above 60%, is it the reason not to join? No, because there's an exception clause if you bring your debt down, and we have at the moment the pandemic and a partial suspension of the rule. So let's not be dogmatic about that, let's be intelligent, and as we have one common principle under Next Generation EU, let's apply this also to our domestic finances. Your question, say me what it was again. It was very good. Ah, yeah, small states coalition. So, I have to say, I don't know these frugals. None of them is frugal. If these are frugal countries, look what they spent. I live here in Austria, I get at the moment, and I'm grateful for that, me, my wife, and my pets, €500 into my letterbox to compensate for climate and for inflation. So this is not very frugal. I have to say that's very efficient. People complain they have to queue for 10 minutes at the post office for that, or 20 or 30 minutes, because people in Vienna sometimes like to complain, to grantle a bit about that, but it's €500 per person. That's not really frugal. I think it's very necessary. I'm behind this measure, but it's not frugal. Germany, frugal, with a package of 200 billion. In the past 10 years, people have complained that Germany is never investing money. Now everybody complains that they spend 200 billion. So we are not very frugal at the moment. No, I think these coalitions, all coalitions make sense, because we have the German-Franco one, we have partly even the German-Franco-Italian one, Spanish-Portuguese, Eastern Visegrad, Nordic countries. Yes, in Europe it works like that. You team up, but you team up on issues. The idea that you have a stable coalition on every file doesn't work on all issues. And therefore, I think the Hanseatic League was a nice idea, but people had very different views on that. On one issue, that was the multi-annual financial framework and the single market, they agree. On other issues, they didn't agree. The Visegrad Four, Andor is my witness, they don't agree on everything. No, they agree on 2 or 3 things, on the others they don't agree. But that they sit together before European Council and say, what do you think, what do I think is part of the European project? And that Austria does it as well is very justified. Austria would be foolish not to discuss with neighbors and like-minded before a particular issue. At the moment, some countries want to stop gas from Russia immediately. I would be personally very much in favor, because I think that would make sense. But Austria and Germany would say, under no circumstances, we are not ready yet for that. So is that illegitimate? No. You team up, you make this point, and then you try to find a compromise on this one. So I think these coalitions make sense, but let's not exaggerate. They are not forever. And like in a big family, like in a big club of friends, today with them, together with them, on the issue that is relevant. On your question, very good question. And of course, as a lawyer, I should say, yes, of course. Let's formalize everything even more and put it into a new architecture. My most fascinating experience was working the European Convention. 10 years we work on nothing else than on changing the treaties. And for a lawyer, this is a dream. But when I look what happened to this politically, it took 10 years until it was agreed. There were 2 major institutional crises that paralyzed the European Union. I'm a bit more careful on this one. So, and what do I have to formalize? Next generation EU, it is temporary. Yes, I agree. But it runs until 2058, and all this has to be repaid. 2058, I think I'm almost retired by then. So I think this is not so bad. It is also, Next Generation EU is legally done by means of a treaty change, because it has been ratified by all 27 member states, because it's a change to the own resources decision. So Next Generation EU is formalized. And on the instruments of the ECB, the TPI that you mentioned is not formalized, it's only a press release. Also Mario Draghi's intervention was only a press release, the OMT. It was never formalized. Was this such a bad thing? Sometimes, notably in financial markets, I learned that it's not always wise to write everything down. This is today also a bit like in military doctrine. Don't say exactly what you're doing when the other guy does this. Just have a credible deterrence. That the ECB needs that our European Monetary Union needs this. The Americans do this as well. And they have not written everything down. The US Fed has its policy, it has its discretion. So I would say what we need to write down in the coming 10 years, but please, after the next 2 crises, I think we need to decide how we work together in a union that will, in my view, unavoidably be enlarged to 30, 35 member states. I think the Ukraine war leads to a situation that the European Union will be enlarged. The Western Balkans, Austria, or at least Austrian politics, not the population, is very happy about this for economic reasons. In Central and Eastern Europe, many are happy that Ukraine is going to join. I believe this is all going to happen in the next 10 years, but then we will have, again, to address the issue, how do we function at 30 and 35? And there will have to be some decisions. What kind of budget do we need? I think the current budget of the European Union will not be ready for such a situation, because it's not a budget with which you can really work. That's why we needed Next Generation EU. So this reform we will need to do, but for the time being, for this crisis, we are prepared financially, in monetary policy terms, if monetary policy and fiscal policy continue to work in harmony. Because that's what you mentioned in the crisis 2020, the pandemic. Why did we manage to kill the spreads? We managed to kill the spreads because Christine Lagarde and the 27 members that the EU institution did exactly the same. They worked in tandem. 750 billion was the PEP, 750 billion was the Next Generation EU. That was not an accident. We worked in tandem on both sides to do this together, and I'm not yet sure that we're already there in this current challenge in which we are. But that's why we have a European Council this Friday, and don't be too optimistic. That's why I'm not only optimistic, not about European Councils, but it's always another step. I find it already good that 27 leaders take the time out of their agenda to be together for 2 days in Brussels. This alone makes progress because you listen to the other, you prepare it in the plane, and if you read the document and the position of Malta and France only in the plane, you have already learned something and you advance Europe. Therefore, it's good that we meet on Friday. It will not be the final meeting, and therefore, let's continue to work in this way with optimism, but also with some realism on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.